When I was young, why goodness me, I used to dream all day of elephants and crocodiles in places far away. But of all things weird and wonderful, it's very strange but true. Although I love my teddy bear, I like monsters too.
After a few minutes, O'Brien was finally able to contact another member of his team. Only 3 more had survived the vampire's rampage last night. Close to 100 civilians, meanwhile, were butchered. It's incredible how, in spite of these staggering loss of life, people still won't accept the truth about what is really out there. Not that I'm judging. Had I not been caught up right in the middle of it, I probably would have bought the official cover story too. O'Brien would assure me that it was for the best that humanity not discover the way things were, and it would be like throwing gasoline on the fire that is humanity's problems. I'm not sure I quite agree with him, but I'm in no position to change that now anyway. I'm happy to write this journal that no one would believe, but if I was to try and go public, then not only would most still look upon me as a crackpot, but O'Brien and others like him would do their best to undermine me and silence me. And I'd also be a target for every demon and vamp in Scotland and beyond, all of whom would rather like their anonymity. Again, though given how bold the vampires were in this attack, I do wonder how long this powder keg can go without exploding. We soon met up with 3 survivors of the attack. Sophia was one of them, whilst the other 2 were a young man and a woman my age called James and Elizabeth, who were in a relationship. There had been 12 units sent to deal with the vampire infestation last night. This was all that was left. There were just so many of them. They didn't even feed. They just slaughtered their victims. This is part of something huge, Sophia said as she patched up a really nasty vampire bite on her arm. Agreed. And that's why I think we really need to talk to the great Caradon, O'Brien argued. The others were clearly a little taken back by his suggestion. None of them were what you would call cowardly, but the thought of going to see this beast put the fear of God in all of them, and they soon started arguing. Elizabeth preferred waiting for reinforcements, while James felt that they needed to question the locals, maybe see if they could find any of the vampire's human servants. He figured an operation this big could only work if there were people to shelter the vampires during daylight hours. At one point, he even turned his suspicion towards me for just surviving. Sophia, meanwhile, who was clearly the leader of the group, didn't like any of their ideas. The great Caradon was a legendary beast that lived below the castle of St. John in Stranraer. It was an 80-foot-tall shark man. The Caradons, from what I was told, were a race of magical shark men. They are born using a spell that works in the following ways. An area of water is doused in magic, after which a shark and a person are placed into the area, and the shark will then, under the influence of the magic, devour the human, after which their souls, which will both merge together into one monstrous entity, a Caradon. Just as there are different species of sharks, then there are multiple different Caradons. The great Caradon, as he is known, was the result of a human, or rather several humans, and a megalodon being merged together. The megalodon being brought back using a magic first as they went extinct before humans evolved. For centuries, the great Caradon had been a fierce warrior under the ocean who'd taken part in the Great Mermaid Wars, but eventually he grew tired of that life and retreated to a massive cave beneath Stranraer, where he now resides in a beautiful garden he created and sustains with magic. There are just 2 entrances to the garden, one from a cave leading out to the sea and the other from above, contained in a hatch beneath the castle. The creature will kill anyone who uses the entrance leading out from the ocean. You are only allowed to enter via the castle. Even then, however, you have to bring the shark something or else he will eat you. And even then, if he doesn't like it, he will still devour you. If the gift pleases him, however, he will give you vital information and maybe even some magical power. The shark has no alignment generally and has been known to help both hunters and demons, though he has a special dislike for vampires, viewing them as the ultimate filth, and has never been known to help one. Naturally, O'Brien hoped that with this in mind, he might help us against the new and improved vampire horde. But then Sophia was still unsure, as the shark was notoriously difficult to please. About 80% of people and demons who'd gone to him asking for favours had never returned. The shark had very eclectic interests, much like me. Sometimes he would be happy with a film taped off the television, though my suggestion of When Harry Met Sally was shot down right away. Other times he'd eat you for giving him something so common. A lot of hunters and demons had come to the conclusion that he just liked messing with people. Still, his help was always valuable, and given the unprecedented vampire attack last night, it seemed that we had no choice. Elizabeth's suggestion of waiting for reinforcements didn't seem likely, as they would have had to wait hours for people from the offices in Evermore and Glasgow to arrive, assuming they weren't dealing with their own crisis. Sadly, the Galloway office had been destroyed by the vamps last night too. Meanwhile, if we did find the vampires' human minions, there weren't enough of us to deal with them. The question was just what to offer the monster. Sophia was dead set on a Lubrins demon. These disgusting creatures were a favourite prey of the Caradons that lived in the waters near Scotland. It really was the safest bet. Added to that, these creatures, though known to prey on humans, were relatively easy to catch and to draw out. It would only take about half an hour at the most to draw one out and restrain it. James and Elizabeth were still unsure, thinking that it would be suicide to even consider the Great Caradon, but with no other options. My other suggestion of just running like fuck out of Galloway was shot down. Me and O'Brien went to the castle, while Sophia and the others went demon hunting. The owner of the castle, which was open to the public, a man named Harris, knew all too well about the giant shark living in his basement, and was also familiar with O'Brien's little organisation too. The castle had been through about 20 different owners in the last 5 years, all of whom had foisted it upon their successor without telling them about the monster in the basement. To be fair, I doubt any potential buyer would have believed them. The Great Caradon isn't exactly a bad roommate, though. He generally just keeps himself to himself. It's more the demons and the hunters who keep coming constantly to bargain, threatening the owner and sometimes even wanting to use him as a sacrifice to the giant shark below that are the problem. Harris had not dealt with any visitors in a long while, but was still always prepared for them and knew how to step aside when the hunters arrived. As we waited above the hatch, O'Brien tried to make some small talk with me. Not surprisingly, however, we didn't have much in common. I was interested in his job to some extent, but sadly that was the one thing he didn't really want to talk about. Not just because he wasn't allowed to, but I imagine the trauma of seeing so many people be ripped apart isn't something I'd be eager to revisit. Having said that, though, it was incredible how much he and all the others were just getting on with business after seeing so many people they'd known for years be killed by those things last night. Clearly, this was just another day for them. Eventually, the others arrived after half an hour or so of awkwardness, complete with a demon bound and gagged. It was even more disgusting than the vampires. Sophia assured me not to feel any sympathy for the beast, as it had caused quite a fuss a few days ago when it tried to devour a small child. One of their agents chased it away, but it still managed to take the child's foot off. The increase in vampire activity caused the monster to sadly slip the hunters' minds until now. All of the hunters went down the hatch, and I was forced to come as well. Apparently, the great Caradon will not talk to you unless everyone who is there comes with you. That way, he can be more sure of who he's giving advice to. When the shaft opened up, there was a large, glowing yellow light that we just stepped in. And within a few seconds, we all found ourselves in what looked like an underground jungle. The demon tried to wriggle free along the floor whilst we were all still in shock, but it was stopped by a horde of velociraptors that emerged from the trees around us. They must have stood about 6 feet tall, scaly and blue in colour, though their eyes were a piercing red. They soon surrounded us. The hunters instantly raised their weapons, but I was completely transfixed on the dinosaurs. I definitely should have been scared. Those animals could have torn my guts out and come back for seconds in the blink of an eye. Still, I've had such a fascination with dinosaurs since, way before I can remember. There's literally a picture of me dressed in dinosaur pyjamas when I was a toddler. To see one in the flesh like this, unlike with the vampires, fear was replaced with wonder and amazement. Though, granted, when the dinosaurs started to roar and bare their blood-stained teeth, I did get a wee bit scared. O'Brien later told me that these dinosaurs were not quite as they were in life. Very rarely are resurrecting spells able to recreate someone exactly as they were, and these dinosaurs, who the great Caradon had brought back from their bones using magic, were therefore altered somewhat. This explained why they had no feathers and the raptors were huge. Still, they looked realistic enough to me. We soon saw, however, that there were other horrors living in the jungle. Several pterosaurs started to circle above us, and the raptors began to scatter, though they still remained close by when a giant frilled lizard came into view. It must have been close to 30 feet long and quick as a flash. Its tongue pulled a pterosaur into its mouth, which then swallowed whole in an instant as a normal lizard would a fly. At this point, I was starting to get scared. But fortunately, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the great Caradon soon emerged from the trees behind us. He was even larger than O'Brien had described. He was far bigger than any of the trees around us, that's for sure. The raptors, meanwhile, ran up to their master like affectionate puppies. They even started to playfully lick his feet, and the giant shark reaching down and patting the largest member of the pack on the head. Clearly they were his favourite pets in the forest, as the pterosaurs and the lizards both just retreated instantly. Given the close relationship between vampires and dinosaurs, it's quite surprising that the great Caradon likes dinosaurs so much, but I guess he doesn't hold that against the great reptiles. The giant shark man looked down at us for a few seconds. It's always hard to tell what's going on behind a shark's black, blank, lifeless eyes. Granted, normally there isn't anything going on under there, but after a few agonising seconds, the shark reached down and picked up the demon that was trying to wiggle its way across the forest and held it upside down. "This is what you brought me," the monster said, booming, but otherwise in a human-sounded voice, before he chewed the demon up in a single bite and swallowed its remains. "Not bad. I would have preferred if you'd got me at least 3 of those things. Normally, I'd eat one of you, the most useless member, for getting me too little." I suddenly started to look scared. "However, I know why you're here. The children of Castran are gathering. Children of Castran, by the way, is a really pretentious name for a vampire. He then led us through the jungle ahead. At either side of me I could see more dinosaurs and prehistoric creatures, some of which I didn't even recognise. I got distracted, however, by a fight between two male Tyrannosaurus rexes tearing into each other near a lake. I almost didn't realise that the rest of the group were about 20 feet ahead of me until Sophia thankfully noticed and shouted at me. We soon reached the great Caradons, a guest living quarters which consisted of a massive red and gold chair sitting in front of a purple glowing sphere, which he could apparently watch the world above with. He sat down on his throne and started to show us footage of the vampire's rampage last night on the sphere. The entire team had to watch their failure to protect both the civilians and the teammates from the bloodsuckers last night, as well as many other attacks they didn't even know about. I, meanwhile, saw myself running away and leaving everyone behind in the pub, though fortunately none of the others seemed to judge me. I guess they were all too upset about their own failures, or maybe, despite only knowing me for a few hours, they didn't expect anything different. After it was over, Sophia was the first to speak. I don't understand why you bothered showing us the horror we already lived through. Is it just some form of torture before you finish us off for not bringing you enough demons to eat? Sophia snapped. James and Elizabeth, meanwhile, both looked at her with a combination of disbelief and anger. Hell, I felt the same way. For a supposed expert of the occult, she didn't seem to realise that it's probably not a good idea to shout at the giant shark god that keeps dinosaurs as pets. If she was at the end of her tether and not caring anymore, well, she could at least not drag us into it. The shark, however, thankfully, was not angered and stood up from his throne. I just wanted to see what you were made of, and I must say that your track record is not impressive, he said to the hunters, who all meekly accepted it. Again, except for Sophia. Well, you know that you can't judge us just by one night. I've actually killed 2 Turricans, Sophia protested. The shark responded to her boasts meanwhile by picking Sophia up, which caused the others to lift out their weapons. Even Sophia didn't back down and reach for her weapon for all the good it would do. You have courage. Well, most of you, the shark said, in what I'm sure was a little dig at me. I let it go, however, which sadly proved his point, I suppose, but still. I'd prefer someone else, like the circus family or Professor Fang, to deal with this. But since you're all that's here, you'll have to do. You're right. These vampires are not just killing for the fun of it. Their slaughter last night was part of a wider sacrifice. That's what all these killings have been. The slaughter of humans, demons, even animals like that shark that washed upon the beach. It's all part of a resurrection spell designed to bring a vampire back from the grave, the shark said as it placed Sophia back down. I knew that some vampire species have the power to come back to life, but in our experience, when most of them die, they stay dead, Elizabeth said. Whenever a vampire dies, its soul is sent to a pocket dimension created by the Castran, the demon that created every single vampire species on Earth. There, their souls hunt each other for all eternity, dying but constantly coming back within that dimension. It is theoretically possible to bring any vampire's soul back from that world, but
In order to do so, it requires incredible power that is beyond even most witches and warlocks,"
the Shark replied as he sat back in his chair. He continued,
"The spell is used to bring back one of the most powerful types of vampire. It first requires the souls of several hundred mortals and several hundred demons. They have that now, after the last few weeks. All they need is the life of the killer of the vampire they wish to bring back."
"On earth are we supposed to know who that is?" O'Brien asked, before realising that he was perhaps a little too blunt with the Shark.
"I suspect the vampire these leeches want to revive is none other than the Blue Devil, the former vampire king of Scotland. He was the only member of his kind. Unlike all the other alpha vampires created from the Book of Caradon, who sired and spawned other members of their kind, the Blue Devil famously didn't make any others like him, so that no one could ever figure out his weaknesses by killing his lesser children," the Shark explained.
He also went on to tell us how the Blue Devil had been a vicious picked warrior who had collected heads of Roman centurions before being turned into an alpha, and how he had a greater command of dark magics and demons than any sorcerer. He also explained that if the Blue Devil was reborn, the souls of all the people the vampires killed as part of the ritual to bring him back would be sent in its place to be hunted by the vampires forever. If push came to shove, the Shark said he would destroy the Blue Devil himself, but he did not want to come to that and hoped we would prevent it. Even he, it seemed, was appalled at the idea of anyone being condemned to the vampire's dimension forever. Finally, the Shark told us who killed the monster. It was a sorcerer who, morally speaking, wasn't much better than the Blue Devil himself. They had both killed each other in a final duel, and so the vampires were planning on reviving her before killing her again to complete the ritual. Unfortunately, however, her soul had been placed in an interdimensional prison, ironically, of her own making. This place was a mini hell dimension where all the souls of her enemies were banished. Men, women, and even children were imprisoned in that nightmarish dimension. The portal to this mini hell was contained in Glenluce Abbey, of all places. The great Caradon had a spell to access it which he fused to our very bodies. It had taken the vampires over 20 years to try and break into it, using all the magics they had. The Caradon warned us that as soon as we broke the portal, the vampires would follow. It would take them another day to break in otherwise. He also warned us not to try and help any of the other spirits in the dimension. By this stage, most of them will have gone crazy after exposure to the black magics of the place for centuries. On top of that, if too many spirits were freed at once, the dimension would try and stop them from leaving. And after giving us the spell, the Shark warned us that if we ever failed, he might just eat us before the vampires could. Once he was done explaining, the Shark whisked us back to the castle. I honestly wondered if I'd just dreamed what I'd seen. Hell, I still wonder it. But with no time to waste, I was soon forced into a car along with the other hunters and taken to Glenluce Abbey. I'd always find the place a wee bit unsettling, to tell you the truth, even on my previous visits. The gateway was in a hall in the abbey that always had an echoing sound to it. We simply entered the hall, and when we came out the other end, we were in a dark, twisted, nightmarish version of Galloway. The woods were dark, withered, the sky was red, and there were howls and screams in the air. As we walked through the woods, we saw ghosts and spirits wandering around aimlessly. Some of them were just children, and there was a temptation to try and help them, but I heeded the Chuck's words and they failed to notice us. To be honest, I don't think any of them knew what was in front of them either way. As we made our way deeper into the woods, this nightmarish caricature of Galloway, however, we started to notice the ghosts getting more agitated. It was the vampires who had arrived in this hell dimension thanks to our actions, and by entering we had finally broken down the last of the barriers for just a few minutes, which allowed the vampires, who were trying to break in from another area, to instantly be pulled in too. The vampires' very presence was enough to disrupt the hell dimension. Vampires were made from the very darkest power of the Caradon, the former god of all demons, and it conflicted with the magic used to contain the reality. The ghosts all started to become crazed and attacked each other. And whilst they didn't seem to pay much attention to us, even as they were phasing through us in their panic, one of them did eventually reach out and somehow managed to bite James. I don't know how a ghost can bite with no teeth, but apparently there's some metaphysical explanation behind it all. Anyway, Sophia soon told us to scale the nearest tree. I'd climbed a few trees as a wee girl, but I still needed some help from Elizabeth to get to the top of this one because it was absolutely disgusting to touch. It looked dry, but it was actually slimy when you put your fingers on it. And if you held onto the bark long enough, then the horrible little insects would start to appear over your fingers. When you got to the top among the bare branches, meanwhile, large featherless birds with human, or should I say demon faces, would start attacking you. I was useless holding them off, but Elizabeth and James had plenty of demon repellents on them. Below, meanwhile, I could see the vampires in the distance slaughtering their way through the ghosts. The vamps had knives made from the claws of another race of demons called Vandals. James filled me in that apparently Vandals are the sworn arch-enemies of vampires, and that they feed on their victims' souls rather than their blood using their claws. The vampires were actually capable of harming and even killing ghosts on their own. Again, by harnessing the dark power inherent of all vampires from Caradon, they could easily destroy a person's soul. This, however, was a lot quicker, and the monsters sliced and diced their way through dozens of angry spirits, no problem. As the vampires continued to hack their way through the barrage of ghosts, I suddenly noticed the lake in the distance beginning to rumble. It was completely black. In fact, it looked more like mud than water, so it was hard to tell. But soon it became obvious as the water started to bubble furiously. I thought that was maybe a lake of monsters. After all, O'Brien had mentioned Nessie earlier. However, it soon turned out that the lake itself was the monster. The entire lake rose up in the air and formed into a massive demonic face, which let out a hideous cackle before sweeping its way across the forest. Our tree stood above the water, so we were safe, though only just. The vampires, meanwhile, were instantly swept away, with the water slowly burning them until they were nothing but dust. All of the ghosts were also swept up in the water too. I could see them very clearly through the black water as it flowed all around the tiny treetop I was on. They were all reduced to nothing but skeletons, though they didn't vanish completely like the vampires, and they were still able to move in some cases, still desperately tried to swim to safety. Those who managed to poke their hands and their heads above the surface's flesh was restored, though only on the parts above the water, which melted off again when they were dragged back down with the current. Thankfully, in a few minutes the water retreated back to the lake, whilst all of the skeleton ghosts fell to the earth and slowly began to regenerate their flesh. Unlike the vampires, who the water beast wanted to destroy instantly, clearly the ghosts had been through this unimaginable agony 1,000 times before. I wanted to help. I still do. But sadly there was nothing any of us could do. At least for now. According to O'Brien, the team at Scathach are constantly trying to find a way to bring an end to not only this mini hell dimension, but sadly, the many others that are scattered around Scotland. With so many distractions, their efforts haven't been quite as successful as they'd hoped. After a few more minutes, to make sure that there were no vampire survivors, we crawled down from our trees and continued to search the forest, mindful to keep away from any large body of water. We reached the witch's prison. She was locked in a cage, so small she could barely move, that was contained within a cave at the edge of the forest. As she would later tell us, she was trapped here for centuries, barely able to move, with the souls of all the other people trapped here coming in once a day to spit on her, in what was ironically their only reprieve from the horrors of this place. Her jailer was a large, red-skinned demon with small tentacles covering its head and no other facial features. It did, however, have a massive eye in its chest, whilst its arms and legs had no joints and could move in every direction. Instead of hands, it also had 2 massive suction cups. The monster started to attack us the second we got within the cave. Elizabeth learned the hard way that those suction cups were for when the monster used them to strip 2 large sections of skin from her arms. Oh gosh, I nearly puked at the sight of it. But soon the monster's eye caught me in a large beam of light. It kept me completely frozen and in a state of pain so severe that I was completely knocked out. And when I came to a few minutes later, I saw that my companions had dealt with the monster. Well, at least that's what it looked like. They were covered in a red goop, and bits of the demon were splattered all over the cave. I think it's safe to assume that it wasn't suicide. The witch we had come here for, meanwhile, was surprisingly calm. In spite of having endured centuries of torture, she didn't say a single word to us, but happily went along with us nonetheless. As soon as we got out of the cave, however, all of the ghosts, whose flesh was still regrowing, walked towards us slowly, as did several other demons like those in the cave. More demon birds also began to circle above, and even the monstrous lake was beginning to rise again.
As I faced certain death, all I could think of was how on earth did I get in this situation? Last night I was going for a drink with Lucy, and now I was in literal hell. I honestly just gave up and waited for the monsters to kill me. But this time the witch had encased us in some kind of magic bubble, which then elevated us above the dying jungle. It then flew us across the forest in a matter of seconds, and through another swirling portal that was surrounded by a circle of large stones. She warned us it would hurt, and oh dear God, every single part of my body, even my eyebrows, was in constant pain. When we finally came to the other side, though, we landed in a small, dirty little chasm, and that went on for ages. The witch then imprisoned us in the very same bubble she had used to pull us out of that hell dimension.
Not that I'm not grateful for you rescuing me from that torture, but forgive me for being a little suspicious. Nobody would ever want to rescue me out of the goodness of their hearts, as I'm not a very nice person. I am, however, extremely powerful, and foolish people who don't know I'm not a very nice person have thought I'd help them if they helped me, the witch said.
Believe me, under normal circumstances, we'd be happy to let you rot in the very hell that you created. However, as it is, we need to protect you. The vampires who I trust you must have sensed when they entered here are looking to resurrect you so they can kill you and complete their ritual to bring back the Blue Devil, Sophia said back to the vile spectre. The witch instantly released us from the sphere.
Nothing unites people better than hatred. For now,
We're allies, the witch replied. I was surprised she believed her so quickly, and I even asked her why she did. I know vampires. Most of them are just degenerate, blood-sucking monsters, happy to maim, torture, and kill for their own amusement. The fact that some of them were able to enter my hell dimension, however, shows that they must all be working together on something big. You don't access that place really easy. And the Blue Devil and his servants were always a cut above the average little blood rat, she replied. I know we had to get to go to that big shark man to get in, I replied. The Great Devourer! Well, I'm shocked he didn't eat you. He must have gone soft in all the years I was locked up, the witch replied. I almost laughed at the idea of him going soft. But looking back on it now, there are worse things for a giant shark man to do than potter about in his garden. After some more discussion about how we're going to help the witch, we made our way through the long cavern ahead. Suddenly, however, Sophia stopped us in our tracks. She could sense it. Ever since it almost swept her away to the netherworld on a previous mission, and just a few seconds later we could all hear the engine roaring. It was the ghost train of old Galloway. I'd heard stories about it. I think everyone in the region had. One time I even overheard some children playing a game of Ghost Train. Obviously, I never thought it could be real. But after fighting vampires, well, running away from them, and talking to a shark man, I should have been prepared for anything. As Sophia explained to me, the Great Ghost Train was a result of the witch's mini hell dimension, albeit unintentionally. It created a great spiritual upheaval in the local area, hence why ghost sightings in general are a lot higher here. Fortunately, most of the time they were harmless. The ghosts would be dragged into our reality for a short while, where they would be dazed and disoriented, only to vanish back to the netherworld again. The ghost train, however, was a special case. Due to being a large concentration of spirits, it was capable of dragging still living people back with it. And at the same time, the train did not come from the netherworld. Over the centuries, numerous witches, gods, and even demons had found a way to channel souls into their very own pocketed dimensions, or, in the demons' case, their home realities, leading to different myths and legends of the afterlife. Evidently, the ghost train, for whatever reason, was sent to one of these pocket dimensions. No one knows exactly where. Apparently, Sophia and a team have been trying to exorcise it for years now. But the train pops up at random, and it's here for such a short time that no one can ever find it for too long. Given we were near an open portal to the witch's hell, it made sense that it would arrive here. It wasn't even running on any tracks. It was just blindly driving its way towards us through the cavern. There was no way we could outrun it, and for the first time, Sophia, Elizabeth, James, and O'Brien actually looked helpless. None of them feared death, even when going up against the vampires. Fortunately, however, the witch, who was having no idea about the train's history, but sensing the dark power from the ghost apparition, whisked us high above the cliffs and the caverns as it sped past us and eventually faded into thin air. We soon saw from above that we had arrived on a small island. Apparently, this had been the witch's own personal island when she was alive, and where she built her pocket dimension in the first place. She said it was concealed from the rest of Scotland by magical fog. Indeed, the fog was so thick that it looked like the night time, as the entire sky was completely black above. Fortunately, however, she had a boat that could take us all away from it. She lowered us back down into the cavern, however, telling us that she was almost using almost all of her power to manifest a no-fall back into her own hell, and that she wouldn't be able to even lift us up in the air again like that. After about half an hour walking through the cavern, we reached the beach on the other side. where there was a single old-fashioned boat washed up. The beach was also covered in the corpses of sea creatures, including octopuses and small sharks. As we made our way back to the boat, however, several large, hideous creatures began to emerge from the ocean around the boat. They all must have stood about 8 feet tall and were covered in slime and seaweed. They had a vaguely humanoid shape, though it was hard to tell under the green slime. The only facial features I could make out were 2 large black eyes. The witch stood before the creatures and calmly said,
"Do not worry, my children. These people are with me. They may leave this island and—"
Before she could even finish, one of the monsters grabbed her in its stumpy, slimy hand and soon absorbed her into its grotesque body.